Welcome to section 1.3. In this video and the next, we're going to talk about different ways to categorize data. In this section, we're going to focus on the distinction between absolute and relative quantities. We are going to step away for a moment from data in games, and we're going to look at some examples of data in the media. In particular, we're going to look at some quotes from a couple of books that I've been reading or that I've read that have to do with race, but these kinds of quotes come up all the time. Race is just an issue I'm particularly interested in. Well, let's start by talking about what we mean by absolute and relative quantities. So absolute quantities are basically just a number with units. For example, $250, the number is 250, the units are presumably United States dollars in this case. And in games, your experience points. Those are absolute quantities, right? 30,000 experience points. Relative quantities are quantities that are ratios intended to compare one quantity to another, often expressed as a percentage. For example, 67% of my revenue comes from ice cream cones. Right? 21.5% of my experience points came from beating the boss at the end of level 3. Those are absolute, those are relative quantities. Seems kind of simple, but let's think about how they're used rhetorically. In other words, how you use those quantities to communicate a message and the choices you have between them. We'll look first at quotes from this book called The Sum of Us. It just came out this year, and I'm only about halfway through reading it. The author, Heather McGhee, her argument is that racism has impacted our culture and our policy perspectives in a way that doesn't just harm those who are the victims of racism, but also harms white folks and those in positions of privilege as well. So let's look at a couple of things she says. So this first quote, she's talking about opposition to Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, had a law that part of the law allowed states to get additional funding if they expanded who's available for free state-sponsored medical care. And here's the quote. First, they found that Medicaid expansion had robust support among Black and Latino Americans at 82 and 65% respectively. Respectively means in the same order, but slightly below majority support among white Americans at 46%. And one of her arguments, and you have to read the book to decide whether you think she makes a persuasive case or not, is that whites were less inclined to support Medicaid expansion because of they didn't want to see Black and Latino folks benefit, people of color benefit as in the same way that they might benefit. But the point I want to focus in on is the use of percentages. Why would she use 82% and 65% and 46% instead of the numbers of the absolute figures, the number of Black, Latino Americans, and white Americans who supported Medicaid expansion? She used a relative figure, percent. Well, because if I said 1,632 Black people that I spoke with supported Medicaid expansion, I don't know if that's a lot or a little, right? I don't know how, and I could say, well, 1,693 out of 2,000 supported, and then I have to think about it a little bit. But by using percentages, we both, first of all, tell you how significant the number of supporters are relative to the size of the population, and simultaneously, we make the statement in a way that is close to benchmarks to us that are familiar. We know over 50% is a majority. 82% we know is a large majority. It's over 3/4, over 75%. 65% is still a good majority, but not as large. And we know the 46% is less than half. So it's a minority. Let's look at another quote. In this quote, McGhee is discussing the impact of the 2008 financial crisis, which had to do with issues with home loans. So here's the quote. In 2013, Wells Fargo finally foreclosed on Amy Rogers. She was giving kind of a long story about Amy Rogers' experience. She was one of 679,923 Americans to experience foreclosure that year. So in this statement, McGee chose to use an absolute figure, 679,923. The units are people, in this case specifically Americans. So why wouldn't she use a percentage? Well, her point she wants to make is a large number of Americans experienced foreclosure in 2013 as the effects of the 2008 financial crisis wore on. If we express this as a percentage, it seems fairly small. The population of the US is about 330 million, so as a percentage, this is about 0.2%, 0.002 times the total population. So as a percentage, it doesn't sound like that much. But now think about 679,923. That's close to 700,000 people. That's more than the number of people in Grand Rapids, certainly more than the number of people at Ferris. We have about 12,000 students here at Ferris. So that would be, you know, like 30 or 40 or even more. You can divide and figure it out. But, that would be like 50 Ferris campuses. Right? So having the absolute figure sometimes helps point out that even though it's a small percentage, it's still a lot of people. Another way to look at it, about 600,000 people died in the Civil War. So more people were foreclosed on in 2013 than soldiers died in the Civil War, in the American Civil War. So sometimes an absolute figure does the job, sometimes a percentage just does the job. And you have to think about the message you're trying to send. We'll look at a couple more examples from another book in the next video.